Hello, friends. It's Chapo.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to another edition of The Inebriated Cast with Matt Chrisman, your host and spirit guide. So, I think we should think of this particular episode almost as a spiritual sequel to the last one about conspiracy theories. If you recall, we did an Inebriated Past a while ago about conspiracy theories. This was in the context of QAnon and the rise of conspiratorial thinking in politics. And we went through a sort of a tour de raison of the American experience with conspiracy culture from the founding till now. And the big takeaway I had was that conspiracy theory is sort of a spontaneous attempt to make sense of the world in the absence of class consciousness, and that it is inherently spectacleized and sort of recuperated by capitalist culture in a way that removes your sense of agency and ability to defeat it, your sense of agency rather, and that you should, as always in politics, just try to focus on what you know and what you can prove and what's in front of you in terms of material politics. And I still think that's largely true. But then, almost immediately after we put out that episode, the motherfucking Epstein case exploded all over all of us. And right in front of our faces, we saw evidence of a international cabal of child abuse enthusiasts and traffickers, all being shepherded around the world by this shadowy puppet master with incredibly strong links to foreign and domestic intelligence agencies, and is in custody. And then a weird attack happens on him in his cell. No one knows what happens. No one can say if he did it to himself or if his cellmate did it. And then 2 weeks later, he commits suicide. He kills himself in his cell, despondent over his future in prison, even though he hadn't even fucking been tried yet. They were in pre-trial. He was still had a bunch of cards to play. He was out there giving money to women to keep them quiet. And then he has this suicide with a highway bone breaking. We all know this. We know the absurd carnival, what you saw in front of us. And it gave a lot of us the condition that we know now as Epstein brain, one of the side effects of which is a desire to follow rabbit holes wherever they lead. And that means going online and making connections between one pedophile conspiracy and another one, one piece of evidence that maybe you overlooked last time, and now you looking at it, and maybe there are dungeons under the Comet Ping Pong. Maybe that was all true. And the reason that happens is because a conspiracy that's really happening, a conspiracy that's powerful and occurring in broad daylight, at the center of it is basically a black hole. And it's so far from our ability to prove that as we get closer to it, our evidence is stretched thinner and thinner, like matter is as it's pulled towards a black hole, until it's nothing, until it's just a singular connection, almost a stream of consciousness. And that's because we lack the evidence. We don't know. And so we follow things into realms that are really less about logic or evidence or anything than they are about emotional feeling and a desire for a narrative, the desire to craft a narrative out of the world around us, which is one of the most basic human urges. And that takes over from your rational judgment. And so I've felt myself getting carried away basically while researching Epstein things. And I mean, the stuff you'll find out. When I found out that Les Wexman, who is the sugar daddy who bankrolled Epstein's entire lifestyle and made it possible for him to become the billionaire hedge fund quote unquote manager that he says he was, in the 90s, his carrier for his clothing lines and retail outlets that would bring clothing from sweatshops in Asia to the United States was Southern Air Transport, which was Air America in the Vietnam War, where it smuggled heroin out of the Golden Triangle, and then was also involved in smuggling cocaine out of Central America during Iran-Contra. I mean, it was literally a CIA-owned company until it was exposed as such by the Iran-Contra investigation. I mean, when you find out a thing like that, your brain starts taking these instantaneous diversions in all directions that you want to follow. And because you're beginning to willing to accept evidence that's scantier because you're more desirous of making a connection. And so you lose your quality sensor, as it were. But the really insane, horrible thing about it is that even knowing that, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that any of the things that you're finding are wrong. It just means you can't know they're right to the degree that we want to act on something. And that's the maddening thing about grappling with conspiracy stuff. Because the obscurity of the world around us, how we're so aware of what we don't know. We're so aware that we're getting this stream of information that seems like it's totally overwhelming, but it still has so many blind spots. And conspiracy theorizing are basically the mold spores that grow in the unenlightened corners of a state where there is no public scrutiny. And the post-war American state is essentially defined by secrecy. And so that means that we live in a culture with a shit ton of fucking mold. But we remember, mold can also be used to make penicillin. So today what I'm going to do is we're going to scrape some of that mold off, and we're going to make a vaccine, which do not, by the way, cause autism, against conspiracy mindset that still acknowledges the reality of a lot of things about it and the worthiness of investigating it further. We'll call it conspiracillin. So so roll up your sleeve. We're going to give you a shot of conspiracillin today with a discussion of something that we like to call in the old conspiracy community, Operation Gladio. All right. Start off just by saying that when I speak of Gladio, there's two things. There is the broader program in all of the NATO countries and some non-NATO countries after World War II to create stay-behind networks in the event of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. And then there's the specific branch of that operation that happened in Italy. Often the whole European thing is considered Gladio, but technically Gladio refers to the Italian branch of this operation. It had different names in the different countries that it was operative in. So today I'm going to, when I speak of Gladio, I'm mostly referring to the Italian campaign itself. So I'm going to keep Gladio because we're mostly talking about Italy. But bear in mind that when I talk about it in Spain or Turkey or Greece or Belgium, that technically it had its own name there and it was part of a greater operation. But Gladio is the spirit of the thing. Now, one of the things that's so enchanting about Gladio is that Gladio is, in its bare outline of things that we know for sure, or at least can think to a relative certainty are true. Gladio in Italy specifically is a vindication of every wild conspiracy type theory you have, because things like false flag attacks and secret cabals operating behind the scenes are all real. That's affirmed. And so that's why it is such a tempting doorway into total conspiracy brain, because, hey, if that was a true false flag, if there are real false flags in Italy, then maybe these are false flags. And then you sort of go into things assuming that they are and finding evidence that suits that predisposition. So that's the danger with Gladio, because it does really tell you it's real, you know. All the stuff you kind of worry about is, oh, that sounds a little crazy, but maybe this is proof that stuff, at least here, did happen. So, but as with any of these things, we have the things we know happened, and then we have the things we think might have happened, and the connections get more tenuous, but the problem is, I don't know if they're wrong. So what I'm going to try to do is something kind of experimental for this podcast, the series here. I'm going to tell you a story about this operation in Europe. Some of the details are going to be confirmed and I think very well established. Others are going to be more suppositional and conjectural. When there's a piece that we know is true, I will underline that, but note that there is no Crispin guarantee of truthfulness to this. What I'm doing is I'm telling a narrative that has been pieced together from the things that we know and can also intuit or whatever about this historical event. And then when we're all wrapped up, we'll say, well, what does it mean? What does it mean to believe this happened? And how does it impact our politics? All right. So the context is the immediate end of World War II. As soon as the Nazis are defeated, the U.S. gets into a war footing in its mind with the new power of the Soviet Union. The Yalta Conference carves up Europe between a free, quote-unquote, Western Europe and a communist Eastern Europe. It is an act of realpolitik on both sides. The Western leaders allow the Iron Curtain, as Churchill will come to call it, to fall in front of all of these people. But at the same time, Stalin used the opportunity to secure the agreement by selling out and disavowing the communists who were involved in a very brutal civil war with monarchists and fascists in Greece. And he sacrificed the Greek communists to secure the post-war thing. So the post-war agreement. So it was both sides just making a strictly rational game theory decision. But as soon as that line was drawn on the west of it, the U.S., where it controlled land and influence, was worried immediately about the possibility of an eventual Soviet attack on that part. Part of that was military. And of course, that concern led to the creation of NATO, the Marshall Plan to recapitalize the economies of these countries, and huge military bases in Germany specifically, are clustered near the Fulda Gap, this area, this broad flat plain in Germany, where the Pentagon theorized that the Soviets would one day perhaps pour divisions of tanks through. So they secure the military and economic borders, but they also have to worry about the question of politics, because these countries were going to have democratic institutions and they were going to have strong communist parties within these countries, because in most of the countries that were under Nazi occupation or a puppet regime, the people who most effectively and strenuously fought against those Nazis were the communists, the partisans in France, in Italy, in Yugoslavia,